Career Planning Virtual Workshop. My name is Kirsten Kay, and I'm a member of the America's Talent Management and Training team. I'm delighted to be here today with the Rewards and Recognition team. I have Colin Murphy, and he will be monitoring questions as we go through this. Just to take a second to orient you all to the technology we're using, just in case you haven't joined a GoToWebinar before, I'd like you to look at that floating toolbar that's hanging on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you would, please look and see the different areas. One of them is marked questions. That's an area that you can click the arrow, expand it, and you can even blow it out if you want. You can type in any question that you have during the course of this webinar. Colin will be monitoring those questions and we will answer them. If they're related to the topic that I'm covering, he's going to interrupt me and I'll answer. And then if there are other topics or unrelated topics, we'll either answer them at the end or we'll take them offline. The next area I want to show you is an area called handouts. You'll see that I have uploaded 3 handouts to this webinar. I will refer to them or I will call them out as resources to you. One of them is called a Career Management Plan template. That template is a comprehensive template that you can use to accomplish the career planning that I'm going to talk about. One of them is called a competency model, which is a whole library of different competencies. And the other one is how to better understand and use competencies. So those resources are there for you. You can download them at any time during the broadcast. Once the broadcast ends, you will no longer be able to download those. I've also attached what we call polling questions to this webinar. So periodically, I'm going to pause and ask questions, and you'll be able to vote directly on your screen. All right, so let's move in and start talking about the what's and whys of professional development. I am going to start with a few polling questions just to get a sense of where people are connecting from. So the first one is going to be, what geographical location are you in? Where are you sitting right now? I can see about 65% of folks have voted. Once we get up to a 90% vote, I'll close it and I'll show you the results. So here you go. You can see that we are seeing a strong concentration from the East Coast and followed by the West Coast and Midwest. All right, let's go to the next poll. What function do you currently work in? That's going to be our next poll. I didn't get an opportunity to list every single thing, but I got all the major topics. %65 have voted. We're at 80. Okay, I'm going to close this one and show you your results. This is nice. We see a really nice mix of people from all the different functions across the business. It's great. All right. Couple others. Hang in there with me. For how long have you been in your current role? So not all time with DS, in your current role. Okay, we're at 90% voting, so I'm going to show you this. You're going to see almost 50% of the folks on the call have been in their current role for 5+ years. Just going to take a note about that. And one last, the question I want to ask you is, what are you hoping to get from this webinar today? So you're either looking for help with your own career plan, understanding how to help others, or you're just curious. All right, we're at 90%. Most of you are looking for help with your own career plan. 37% are just curious. So hopefully by the end of the webinar, you're more than a little curious. All right, I'm going to hide this, and we're going to go on to the next slide. So first off, I wanted to talk about professional development. There is a man named Donald Clifton. He worked with the Gallup organization for years, and Don Clifton is a psychologist. And anyone who knows about psychology knows that when you go to school, you learn about mental disorders, and you learn what's wrong with people and how to diagnose what's wrong with people. And after many, many years in practice, Don Clifton said, I feel really dissatisfied, and I feel really demotivated by this. I'm constantly looking at what's wrong with people. I'm tired of doing that. I really want to think about what's right with people. And around that time in the 70s, the mindset around professional development and career development really started to shift. The two major questions that we all need to answer is, what is it that I need to develop, and how do I develop it? That's what I'm going to endeavor to talk about in today's webinar. So first off, personal assessment. Each and every one of us has to look inside of ourselves and get a handle on what our strengths are, and also what our areas of development are. I would like to dispel a myth at the start of this. Your area of development is not your weakness. It's not stuff you're bad at. I'm going to strongly advocate that if there's something that you're really, really bad at or not interested in, you're probably never going to get very good at it. There's an old expression that says, if you're bad at something and you put 1,000 hours of effort into it, you're going to only be not bad. So let's think of strengths as things you're really good at or really interested in, very, very motivated. And areas of development are places where you just need to grow more. The next piece is, what are the business objectives? In your role, in your functional area, or in a role you aspire to, it's important to take time to find out what are the top business objectives in that area. And then to go back to your personal assessment and figure out what's going to be the most challenging of me, or what's really going to require me to stretch the most. And on top of knowing the knowledge or the skills that you need to develop, it's also behaviors. What kind of behaviors are going to be critical to my success? When you identify some needs to address, they typically fall into one of these four categories. There's something that you've discovered that is critical for your success and you're only average at it. You're only okay or good, and you need to become great. That's something to develop. Another thing could be a skill, a knowledge area, or a behavior that is critically important and you've never had a chance to develop it. So you're untested at it. You need to find some opportunities to do it. The third one is, it's really important, I don't do it well, and because of it, it's causing noise. You know, I'm sitting here with the rewards and recognition team and they work on compensation. Imagine if they had were not that good at Excel, and they had to work in Excel all the time, and because of their job, it was showcasing their weakness in an area. The last one is, I have a strength, but I overuse it. I depend on it too much at the wrong times, and that's causing noise. So the idea is, when you do a great professional development journey, you develop a whole bunch of things so that you have a whole toolbox of things to work with. Okay, so now that I've laid the stage of what we need to talk about, the next piece that everyone cares about is, how do we get there? So I'm going to ask some more polling questions around, do you have a plan, and do you know what the next role that you want is? So here's your chance to vote on whether or not you have a plan, a real plan for the next 5 to 10 years. %80 has voted. We're just about at 90%, so I'm going to close the poll and show you the results. Not surprisingly, 61% only have a general idea, and 33% haven't really given it much thought at all. It's very common. So the next one is, do you know the next role you want? So for those of you who have a general idea, And for those of you who know exactly what you want to do, I think you'll be surprised with these results. We're at 75% voted right now. We're holding steady at 85%. So even though very few said they have an exact plan for the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see that almost half of the folks do know the next role they want. Okay, one more. This one's a really tough question. I expect it might take you a few extra seconds. What are you willing to do to advance your career? You can choose more than one of these options. Select everything you're willing to do to advance your career. %70 have voted. We're at 90%, so I'm going to close this and show you the results. These results are pretty interesting. The least popular option was take a step back to change functional areas. Good news here is at Dassault Systems, we often don't have to take a step back in terms of our title or pay in order to change functions. So I think that's a really great thing we have going for us in our organization. I'm going to hide this and go forward. So that career planning worksheet, the one that you downloaded, at the very beginning of it, it's going to say what's your plan? What are you trying to do? What kind of move do you want to make? What's the desired area, the role, and the timing? So again, that's pretty much where a lot of people start. I'm going to talk you through some of the elements that go into evaluating talent. And this is the kind of stuff we do in our team, in the America's Talent Management team. We work with management to define competency. For every single role in the organization, we call a functional area a job family, and we call the role that a person sits in a role. We try to identify the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are necessary to do all of the work in the role. The next thing we talk about is capability. For each individual person, what is a person able to do right now? What are you capable of? So there might be 10 different competencies, but within each and every one of them, you may only be capable of 3/4 of that competency or half of that competency or what have you. The third piece that we ask, and this is the hardest question, and it's the hardest question to ask of ourselves, is how much are we actually able to grow? What is your real capacity? That's why at the beginning of this webinar I said, don't focus on the weaknesses. A weakness may be an area where you don't have a lot of capacity to grow. Instead, if you think about the places where you have a lot of capability and a lot of capacity to grow, you can really strengthen those and exploit those to get into a role that will make you happy, etc. So taking that in the context, every time I talk about competency in this webinar, I'm talking about a generic set of knowledge, skills, and abilities, not your individual competence. It's a generic sense of competence. So I'm going to ask you all to take a step back. Even though I showed you that worksheet and I said, what's that next role you want, etc., the only way to get to the next role is to be really good in your current role. So first off, know your role. In your current role, what are the competencies that are required of your role? For each competency, you're going to have to figure out how it's defined for your role. And in addition to the definition of the skills, abilities, or knowledge, what is your current performance? You got to know what at-plan performance looks like, described and measured. You need to know what better than planned performance is, how it's described and measured, because you're going to evaluate yourself and figure out, is there a gap I need to close in my current role? Another tool that I gave you is the competency library. It's a big laundry list of generic employment skills. There are knowledge bases, skills, experience, abilities. You might even think of a competency as an attitude or a value. Like we see in My Compass now, the My Leadership Behaviors are part of the competencies. I've given you an example. I think a lot of us are accustomed to thinking about performance in the context of objectives. So for example, I went to My Compass, and I saw that one of my objectives was deliver internal training. Deliver internal training is an objective. It's not a competency. There are a whole bunch of competencies that are involved in me being able to satisfy the objective, deliver internal training. I need to know the course content for every single course I teach. I need to know the course flow for every single course I teach. I need to know adult learning theory and how to utilize it. I need to know how to overcome resistance to learning. I need to be a facilitator who can ensure the learning objectives are met. I need to use great public speaking skills. I also need to coach learners or use questions to guide their learning. I need to have 3DS specific knowledge or applications of the course content so that I can answer people's questions and give them analogies or examples. I need to be flexible enough as a behavior to explore related topics to what I'm talking about. I need to have classroom management skills, whether it's virtual or live, and I need over time to be able to deliver many courses. So that's a whole bunch of competencies. And for every single one of those competencies, I need to know what app plan performance is, how to measure that, and what above, right? What's the above plan performance is. Okay. So assuming I've done all that, I can sit down and I can make a big elaborate table of all my competencies, and I can evaluate right now. Oh, let's say I need to learn a new topic. I have not taught it before. I do not know that course content. Right now I'm below plan at that, which means I'm also below plan at that course flow, right? I don't know how it should run over the course of the day. That being said, I have really high skills in adult learning theory, and I'm good at overcoming resistance to learning. Therefore, my current gap would be getting course content and course flow to at least at plan, if not better than plan. This is the kind of work I need to do to develop in my current role. So again, your gap analysis is two parts. You need to be ready to grow in your role to a point where you are at plan or exceeding plan in every area in order to be able to move to a new role. So it's just a repeat here. Know your current role, know the competencies, know how performance is measured, and make a development plan to close the gaps. When you're able to move to a new role, you will map your competencies, you will understand the expected performance in the new role, and you'll be able to create a development plan. I'm going to take you through that next step. Always, always the goal is to close the gap. So growing in your current role, you want to get to high performance. You want to create a very specific plan to accomplish this. And you want to identify your goals as SMART goals. SMART is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So time-bound is a critical element. Do you want to get this done in some months, in 6 months, in a year, etc.? What's your real goal around this? Again, back to that template document that I gave you, there's whole sections in the document that take you through identifying the competency, making a learning goal around it, figuring out what is the career goal, how to support your development in it. As a little side note, how people learn. I think a lot of folks think, well, if I need to learn a new competency or I need to get better in a competency area, and a competency is defined as knowledge, skills, and abilities, then I need a bunch of training. I need to go take classes. In reality, education only makes up 10%. Why? Because education like this is a theoretical. Theory only takes us so far. The next thing is I want to make sure I have people in place that can coach or mentor me. What does that really mean? I learned something in a classroom and I want to know how they apply it. I go and have conversations with them. I learned something in a classroom, I started to apply it, and then I had a bunch of questions. I want someone to go to validate me or answer my questions, etc. The third piece of this that weighs the most is the on-the-job experience. It's the practical application. For those of you who have ever done a sport, I think of this like sports. I went and took a ski lesson. I did not get better in that one-day ski lesson. But after 3 months of practicing the things, going out day in and day out and skiing and practicing, I got better. I might have found someone who could answer a question about a little detail here and there. But then I finally went back and took another class at some point when I was ready to build on at the next level. All right, so that's really how people learn. And the other thing is we learn from lots of different places and inputs. In order to develop a skill on the job, you got to stretch. You got to do something that's a little bit out of your comfort zone or something you've never done before. You need to find a way where you can take those risks in a safe and supported way. You're going to have to risk failure, and quite frankly, most of us learn the best from our mistakes. And the last piece is that those small failures are going to teach you the most, but they're also going to test your resilience. If you look at most of the leaders across our organization, they're quite often put into challenging situations that they haven't exactly been prepared for, but it's because they've demonstrated they have good thinking skills, good decision-making skills, and they're resilient. That's what gets them ahead. So that's a little side note. So let's go into what we do to make it happen. In order to make it happen, I'm going to strongly suggest, and this goes back to the beginning of the webinar, know what your strategic contributions are in your role. A lot of people talk about what they do in terms of detailing or chronicling all the tactical activities. And whether you're on a job interview or whether you're talking about what you do to someone else in this company or what have you, being able to talk about the strategic impact or the strategic contribution you make, the thing that matters to your team, the thing that matters to your function, the thing that matters to the company is what's going to get people's attention. So what does your management team really care about? How do you provide that strategic value? How are you making that contribution? It's a function of what you're capable of, how much capacity you have to grow, and how much further you could contribute. The first step flavors your plan because it's what you need to be able to say about yourself and your skills. And the second bullet of how do you make this contribution, it's helping you step back and say, what am I really capable of? Imagine you find out that the strategic contribution for your role is something you're not capable of. Then that gives you something to pause and rethink on. Or thinking of how do you develop yourself to become capable. If you're currently capable, but you could be doing more, you could really, I like to use the word exploit in this context. You may hear me say it a few times. You can really exploit it. How can you further contribute? That's knowing where you need to stretch or how you can stretch. Again, in that worksheet that you downloaded in the attachments, there's a whole section on evaluating your strategic contribution. So it's carving out not just on-the-job activities that help you develop skills, it's carving out on-the-job activities that let you do the things that matter most. So you can see the worksheet goes on, setting goals for enhancing your strategic contribution. So again, this is focusing on your current role. Then you are making a very impactful strategic contribution in your current role, and all of your performance is at plan or better than plan. Now you're ready to start figuring out how to get to the next role. You need to understand the objectives for the next role. From those objectives, you then need to understand every competency, just like that example I showed you. Name the objective, map out the competencies. For each competency, you need to figure out how it's used in the role and what at-plan performance or better than plan performance is. Because I can tell you, no one's aiming for below-plan performance in a new role, right? So we're just ignoring that. We're going to move on. So how do you figure all this out? It seems like a humongously daunting task, right? Well, there are definitely people who are in that role today. What you want to do is spend a little time talking to people, building relationships, doing the research to find out who the high performers are in that current role. You might locate 2 or 3 people who are really top performers in that role. You want to go interview them. You want to ask them, what are your objectives? What are the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you use? What's that plan performance look like? What's better than plan performance look like? So you go and talk to 2 or 3 people, you interview them, you compare the results, and every place they say the same thing, you know that's real, right? You start to frame out what that next role will look like. So there's your hint, interview those people and compare their feedback. And then you want to understand what's the strategic contribution of that next role. Looking in the mirror and again deciding, am I capable of that? Do I have the capacity to grow? Then it's about mapping where you are today in your current role to the next role. And when I say mapping, I'm going to get really granular in this example. My current role uses public speaking. Let's say I picked a crazy one. I'm going to become a marketing leader. I'm going to completely change functions. I'm going to go and become a manager in marketing. I'm still going to use public speaking. So if my public speaking is above plan right now, that's great because that carries directly over. I already have coaching and using questioning skills. Well, in my next role, if I'm going to be a people manager, I have to use those coaching and questioning skills, but in the context of balancing a manager who has the authority to just tell people what to do and a coach who develops others through questions and so on and so forth. And I need some on-the-job opportunities to figure out how to make that balance. So I might step up as a project lead or to manage some teams where I have sort of ad hoc responsibilities for managing people. The next one down is 3DS specific knowledge. Well, I have it in my current role, but it's very different in the next role. So go-to-market and what-to-market strategies is what a marketing manager should know. I might have to do some education, right? Go find some documents, review things, read things, and also find a mentor who can help me close the gap in that. Once I have figured out what the gap between my current role and my next role is, then I create that development plan. So again, in this webinar, I'm talking about a development plan to get you to great in your current role. Then identification of the next role, understanding what it takes, and a development plan to get you into that next role. Ideally speaking, you in your current role will start to develop the competencies and start doing some of the work that someone in that other role does. People in organizations like safe bets. Even though I've already talked about risks and failures and so on and so forth, nothing makes you more marketable in that next role than already demonstrating you can do it. So let's get to the next round of polling questions. As we're coming to the end of this webinar, oops, I didn't share the last one, I think. Sorry about that. It was the set of last results. I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to ask you the next question. So as your next step, now that you've participated in this webinar, what do you plan to do next? You can pick as many of these as possible. %50 have voted. Again, you can pick more than one answer. We've got 80% of folks have voted. We're paused at 81, so I'm going to close. We've been looking at this one for a minute, so I'm going to show you your results. So 52% discussing ideas with your manager. It's a great step. One of the best things you can do is start to put some of your developmental goals in place in your My Compass. Figure out a way to leverage your current objectives for your growth objectives. 48% looking for a mentor. Great idea. 64% talk to people in the role I'm interested in. Another great idea. 57% investigate additional education. And I notice only 19% have the discuss my ideas with my HRBP. I will give you a little plug for your HRBPs. They support people in multiple functions and they have visibility into tons of roles. Why would I go talk to my HRBP? Because they're going to help me identify people in roles I'm interested in, and they're going to help me identify mentors. So it's definitely worth checking in with them and just asking for their recommendations. All right, my last question, because I've been running right along and we haven't used tons of time. I want to pause for a second and ask Colin, are there any questions coming in?
We do have a few. So I can start going through some of them.
Yes, please.
They're more general than. So I suppose the first question is really for a person that maybe isn't in love with their current role, but wants something different, but doesn't even know exactly what that would be. Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yes, I do. So I have a recommendation and I have a piece of tough love, if you will. The tough love is, if you're not in love with your current role, and I'm making an assumption, let's say you're not performing as well as you need to be in your current role. If you plan to stay inside the company you work in, so this is generic advice, if you want to stay at your current company and change roles, usually we have to see that your performance is at least at plan. The only way to get out of recovering performance in a role is to leave a company typically. So that's the tough piece. The not so tough piece, or the encouraging piece, is take some time to think about the things you love to do and the things you're really good at. Make a list of those, and sometimes they're not the same. Things you love to do are things you're really, really interested in and things you're really, really good at. Go talk to people. Just go have lunch with people. Talk to people about their jobs. Talk to the HRBPs, etc. Find other roles that use the skills you're good at and give you opportunity to grow in the areas that you're very interested in or love. There's no encyclopedia or dictionary for looking stuff up. You just really have to get out there and talk to people.
And what if a person is, so if there's hiring restrictions in place right now, and their current department can't necessarily backfill their position, what should that person do where they have a role maybe that they're interested in, but their management isn't totally supportive of letting them go to some other role?
That, again, it's real and it's a tough question, and this is another great place where talking to your HRBP really can make a difference, because there's a little bit of a conflict there in that great management supports everybody in their growth and ambitions in an organization, and yet management has the need to deliver their strategic contribution and their objectives. So I would say to an individual, never perceive the constraint, right? If the roadblock exists for your manager, it's not your roadblock. If my boss needs me in my role, that doesn't mean I cannot develop. That just means that right now I need to stay in my role. There might be a future opportunity to develop or what have you. The way I like to frame these conversations, and it's about negotiation skills, is I love to have the conversation that says, I understand the constraints in our department right now. I also have ambition to grow my career. How can we get the department or the team what it needs in the short term and get me what I need in the long term? How can we satisfy both of those at the same time? Because I do want to grow and evolve. And if you make that statement to your manager, it shows cooperation, it shows willingness, it also shows ambition. That's exactly the right spirit, if you will. Does that help?
And the next question is really, so using the example, or really a lot of the different roles at DS have roles where, in essence, that there's a generic title like technical specialist, and then there's a senior technical specialist, etc. Is there some way that a person can go and find that information about what's the difference between those roles, so they can identify potentially what it is that they may be lacking in their current performance, or what they need to improve on in order to obtain one of those higher level roles?
Yes, and that is out there. It's completely transparent. Out on the 3D Experience platform, we all have access to a dashboard called 3DS1. And on 3DS1, there is the role model tool. And furthermore, you can shortcut your way there. You can go to People 360 and you can look a person up. So you can find out what a person does, or you can go to the role model and find all the people who have the role. The role model tool is really great for this topic. If you want to, once we get through the questions, so I'll say two things. Talent management and training team can always show you what's on the platform. Your HRBP uses that role model tool all the time. They can absolutely help you. But again, the 3DS1 dashboard or the People 360 tool can take you into full and comprehensive role descriptions.
This one is really a good question. I think you'll be able to answer it well. If you're competent in your current role and have demonstrated exceptional performance and you know you're ready for a promotion, will HR do it?
I always like to say you drive your own career. So no one will automatically, right? You have to ask for things. You have to advocate for yourself. Perhaps it's an opportunity to verify the difference between your impression of your performance and others' impression of your performance. So there's a few layers to this question. One thing that has to happen as well is that there's an opportunity to grow in a direct or linear way. In some teams, there isn't a direct or linear next step, and so you have to be creative and find a non-linear next step. Again, the way I would proceed with this one is talk to my manager, make sure we're both in agreement about my performance. Then I would talk to my manager about my ambition and my desire to grow or be promoted. I would also talk to my HRBP about my ambition and desire to be promoted, and then carve out a plan for getting there.
And again, another one that's right up our alley. If a person goes to their HRBP to discuss their career, will that automatically be communicated to their manager that they're looking either to grow within their position or outside of their current department?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of people don't realize this because you've never been in HRBP. The first question an HRBP will always ask is, what do you want me to do with this information, or how can we share this information? Every conversation you have with an HRBP is confidential. So the HRBP will ask you, what do you want to see as an outcome? If I was your HRBP, I would tell you, go have a conversation with your manager. Again, it's your career. No one else is going to go pave the way with your manager for you. If you want something, you need to go get it. We're all adults in this sandbox together, if you will. That being said, an HRBP is a great person to practice conversations, talking about how should I position some information, or how could I discuss this? Maybe there's something that's a little delicate or sensitive and you're not sure how to approach it. Your HRBP is a great sounding board for that. Any other questions?
Do you know anything about perhaps any type of job shadowing program or process, or an opportunity to sort of rotate positions to help groom skills?
Here in Dassault Systems today, we do not have a formal program for that. Do know that in our talent management team, we talk about all these kinds of things all the time. We know that they exist in other companies. We always wait to do the right thing at the right time in our company. Just because a formal situation doesn't exist doesn't mean you shouldn't have the conversation with your manager and see if it's possible. For example, our 3 O's process, for some people, our 3 O's process is a way that they rotate through different types of jobs in our organization to position them for a leadership role, for example, or what have you. So I'd have a conversation with your manager to express your interest and your ambition. I'd also listen and be very receptive to any feedback they might have about your performance. If there's performance feedback around getting to great in your current role, take that seriously. Demonstrate that you can get to great in your current role. And when people are identified as top performing, high potential talent in our organization, the organization will often do extraordinary things for people who are very beneficial to the organization and important to keep. Say it plainly.
Okay. And 2 more great questions for HR. How do you find out who your HRBP is? And how do you know what positions are available within the company?
Perfect. The first one, how do you know who your HRBP is? This is the easiest way, I think. Whether you're in Skype or you're in Outlook, you can type your name into a to field or wherever. If you double click it or right click on it, you can expand the box. And the first of 3 tabs, one tab shows you your personal details, which is your name, your address, your phone extension. The next one I think is called organization. And if you drill down into it, it tells you who you are, who your manager is, who their teammates are, as well as HRBP. In your People 360 profile, your HRBP is listed there for you as well. The next question was job openings. We have a large recruiting team, and the recruiting team, there's several people in different offices. A lot of the recruiters sit in the Boston campus in Waltham. You can always reach out to them at any time. We also have a careers page. And the careers, please know that the careers page will only have current openings. So if you're doing this in more of a planful, thoughtful way, you might want to go back to that role model and see all the roles that exist, and have a conversation with a recruiter in your every recruiter oversees a different functional area. Talk to them maybe about the type of role you might be interested in and ask them if they anticipate any openings. HRBPs will also know about openings. So again, it's creating your network of internal people and talking to them on a regular basis.
Do you have any recommendation on how long you should be in your current role before you start looking for a new role?
Yes, I have. I will speak with candor. I myself have been a people manager for more than half of my career, and I will tell you that as a people manager, it raises questions for me when someone wants to switch roles with less than a year or a year and a half in their current role. I wonder what is motivating them, or to keep switching. So again, I think when you go and talk to someone about another role, part of it is why, right? What's your rationale? What's your reasoning? I think a great reason is to talk about how you're on a developmental path. You're in a competency area. You're seeking more and more and more job experiences to develop a certain capability, right? If you go in proactively with the story, I think it paves the way a lot more successfully. In a general sense, spending between 1 and 3 years in a role is what we consider to be the norm.
And a number of people have asked this, and it's just about the recording or the slide deck, and we will have the recording available on rewards@3ds.com. That's our benefits website, where you can find any and all information about our benefits. So we've hosted several of these wellness webinars over the past month or 2, and we have those recordings out there already. We'll add this to that on the rewards@3ds.com site I would guess early next week.
Perfect. Any more questions?
Okay, so I think some people are saying that they were trying to look in the Outlook address book or Skype for their HRBP and aren't finding that there. So again, Kirsten had mentioned also on People 360, it's definitely listed there.
Absolutely.
And then a person has said that they were out on DS1 and they're not seeing an area for their job descriptions, or follow-up question is where can they find a list of the roles within DS?
All right, let me, my last thing in my slide deck before I click out of it is I have a whole glossary of suggested readings. Anybody who's really keen on this topic, there's articles, there's books, there's all sorts of things. I am just going to pop out for a second and log into the 3D Experience platform. I'm just going to show you quickly where I'm talking about on 3DS1. Yes, I know I'm using IE. It's because I have a lot of sensitive information open in Chrome at the moment. I'm just being authentic in case anyone's like, she really should be using Chrome. So when you go out, all of the dashboards are located in this center title. You can see my hand, I'm running it back and forth. There's a drop-down area. Every dashboard that you're subscribed to is here, and 3DS1 is one dashboard that every single employee is subscribed to. When you go into 3DS1, it's a very elaborate dashboard. There's all these different tabs across the top. The One Framework tab is where you're going to find things that relate to role and so on. If you scroll down, you'll notice that role model sits in the lower left of this screen, and there's a double-headed arrow that lets you maximize the role model. Once you get into the role model, you first need to pick the functional area. So for example, let's say it's an R&D role. And let's say at the moment that I am someone who's in a software developer role, right? I can go and look up my own role by clicking on it. This is the exact job description that is used by the manager, by recruiting, etc. So the role description is here. You've got the deliverables, the KPIs. You've got a full section on background skills, etc. If you find that this is not well defined, you've also got someone who's in the role. I'm just going to go back for a second. Let's say it's a user experience designer. You can see all the different people in the role, multiple pages. You can see different types of information is here. When I see deliverables, I think of these as objectives. So the same way I mapped for you that an objective uses a lot of competencies, you'd want to go talk to some of these people in the role to understand what competency they use to meet these objectives. Is that helpful?
Thank you. And a person has I suppose, a vision of a position that should exist or they think could exist within DS, but doesn't right now. What recommendations do you have for them?
I would definitely talk to the HRBP first, I think. The HRBP may have some more visibility. Sometimes here at DS, we don't call things exactly what you'd expect them to be called. The role could exist somewhere. So yeah, I would definitely talk. The HRBP has a lot more visibility across functional areas, and they have a whole team of HRBPs that support each other. So they'll get an answer faster, I think.
And you had talked before about sort of on the short end of how long you should be in a role. That I think you had mentioned 1 to 3 years. How is it viewed when, in essence, you're in a role for quite a while? Does that somehow give an impression that you aren't ambitious, or do you have any feedback on that person that again, may have ambition, but may have been in their current role for a while?
Yes, I'm sort of keying in on the phrases of does it give an impression? And when it comes to judgment, if you will, I like to tell the story that I want told about me. I like to proactively tell that story or to talk to people about why I've been in my role for the duration I've been in it, than just let people form whatever conclusion they want. So my advice is being in a role for any duration of time doesn't mean anything. Either people will form their own opinions or you can tell them what you want them to think.
You've got these suggested reading. Are these all things that a person can just find, say, on the internet, or do we have
Internet,
access?
Amazon, places like that, yes.
Okay.
Are we good?
I think I've hit on the reality is that I'm asking the questions that would apply to the broader audience. So if you do have individual questions, again, speaking with your HR business partner probably would be a good place to start for any type of individual type questions.
I'm really impressed with all the questions. That's a lot of questions for this. And so I get to land with my final polling question, which is, did this webinar meet your expectations? %70 of folks have voted. We're at 80%. And we're holding. So I'm going to close it and show you the results. So for those of you who say definitely, great. I think you have a lot of tools to arm you to move forward. For folks who say mostly and somewhat, if you have a couple of things that are out there, questions that you have as resources your manager, your HRBP, and our talent management team. You can always send a question generically to the NAM Talent Management mailbox, or on our talent management team, we have learning partners who work directly with your HRBP. So you can ask your HRBP who your learning partner is, and you can reach out to each and every one of us. For the folks who said not really, I welcome your feedback. This is Kirsten Kay. You're always welcome to reach out to me or reach out through your HRBP if you want to keep it confidential. Tell us what else we could be talking about or sharing in future webinars. If that's everything, I thank you for your time and I wish you a great afternoon.